Well, listen. If you don't have anything to say, you blab. You just go on and 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 on.
Voters do not agree with these despicable women on The View. They are wildly out of touch with the vast majority of Americans, and frankly, they should seek immediate...
Let's be honest, when someone has nothing of substance to offer, they just keep talking in circles. It turns into this endless barrage of meaningless chatter, a non-stop flood of empty words with no real point. The American public doesn't stand behind the bitter personalities over on The View. Those women are utterly out of touch with what everyday Americans actually believe. In reality, they'd be far better off turning to independent media sources if they want to hear something that resonates with real people. For years, Whoopi Goldberg ruled over The View like a queen sitting on her throne, constantly interrupting guests, steamrolling anyone with a differing perspective and delivering her opinions as though they were the gospel truth, never to be questioned. But in one absolutely stunning moment, all that power she wielded crumbled in front of millions, and the person responsible for shaking the foundation of that empire was none other than Karoline Leavitt. Nobody could have predicted it. The episode began like every other one does: smug chuckles, sarcastic glances, and the usual lineup of panelists nodding in agreement, perfectly aligned with the show's predictable left-wing narrative.
Probably been put in there because according to Donald Trump, she's a 10. Well, that's what it is.
I want to be clear, though, it's not her first job. It was her first press briefing. She worked in the previous Trump administration.
Whoopi, brimming with her usual confidence, leaned back in her seat, fully prepared to dominate yet another segment of the show with her signature flair. Then came the topic of wokeness, a buzzword that The View treats almost like sacred scripture, a concept they go to great lengths to defend, as if it's the very backbone of their collective identity. And truthfully, in many ways, it is. With a sense of untouchable authority, Whoopi fired the opening shot. Wearing her familiar smug grin, she turned toward Karoline and declared with striking arrogance, "If it weren't for wokeness, you wouldn't even have this job." And in that very moment, boom, the atmosphere in the studio shifted dramatically. You could feel the tension thickening in the air. The live audience grew visibly uneasy. Even Joy Behar, who made an entire career out of ridiculing conservatives, squirmed awkwardly in her seat, clearly rattled by the sudden change in tone.
I'm going to stop this interview if you continue to attack my colleagues. I would like to talk about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who you work for.
I am stating facts that your colleagues have stated in the past.
Okay,
now, as
I'm
for
sorry,
this
guys.
debate,
We're going to come back out to the panel. Karoline, thank you very much for your time.
That was so good.
What came out of Whoopi's mouth next was exactly what anyone familiar with her routine would anticipate: bland, repetitive, and downright annoying. After spending so many years in the host's chair, you'd expect her to bring at least a hint of originality to the conversation. But unsurprisingly, that wasn't the case. Once again, we found ourselves stuck in the same predictable loop. Let's take a moment to see what recycled talking point she decides to throw at us this time.
Statement afterwards, this young lady claimed her, quote, on-air snub proves that you know who will not be treated fairly in the upcoming debate. Now, do you think this is going to make people doubt whether CNN can stay objective, or is this more the same of, everybody's against me, it's all rigged, I tell you. Is everything rigged?
No, it's their MO. That's what they do. Rachel Maddow said last week, she's like, if the election is lost, it was rigged. If there's a debate, then the moderators are probably biased and they're prejudiced against me.
The atmosphere in the studio was thick with tension, charged, heavy, and on the verge of combustion. Everyone, from the hosts to the live audience, seemed to brace themselves for whatever was about to unfold. And let's just say this much: Whoopi Goldberg was absolutely not ready for the response that was heading her way. This wasn't just a mild disagreement or a spirited debate between opposing viewpoints. This was something far more serious. Whoopi had taken a direct shot, not just at Karoline Leavitt's perspective, but at the very core of her professional identity. She wasn't challenging an idea. She was diminishing Karoline's entire career, her intellect, her integrity, her accomplishments, reducing everything she had tirelessly worked for to a mere byproduct of the same ideological movement she had spent years pushing back against. It was smug, it was patronizing, and it was clearly intended to discredit and humiliate. Still, despite the blatantly disrespectful remark, the audience responded with robotic enthusiasm, clapping almost out of habit. A few even laughed. But beneath the surface, there was an unmistakable discomfort, a faint but perceptible shift in the room's energy that suggested they sensed Whoopi had gone too far. They just weren't sure how or if they should react to it. But Karoline, she didn't. Once she didn't falter. She didn't rush to defend herself or scramble for a witty retort. Instead, she did something far more impactful. She smiled, slowly, deliberately. It wasn't smug or self-congratulatory. It was the kind of knowing smile that silently conveyed, "You just made a huge mistake." It wasn't loud or theatrical. It was subtle, yet carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had come prepared with the truth, the receipts, and the confidence to dismantle the narrative piece by piece. And with a composure so steady it bordered on chilling, she did exactly that. What happened next was something the audience had never seen before on The View. By the way, if you're enjoying this absolutely explosive exchange, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we're just getting started. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Karoline launched into her response with facts, real, hard data. Numbers that couldn't be dismissed with sarcasm or buried under ideological spin. She laid out government spending reports in precise detail, revealing how taxpayer money had been funneled into absurd, hyper-woke initiatives. Things like gender studies programs in Guatemala, international Sesame Street episodes carefully crafted to promote American-style social activism abroad, and a long list of taxpayer-funded projects that raised more eyebrows than they did support. With methodical clarity, she connected the dots, exposing how the concept of wokeness had shifted from a cultural conversation into a powerful political tool, one that was now being used to censor dissent, control narratives, and punish anyone brave enough to question its motives. And Whoopi? She wasn't smirking anymore.
And disgusting speech that any president, certainly in my lifetime, has ever given. He essentially waged war on half of the country by saying that we are all a threat to democracy because we believe in putting America first. It's not radical to want to put your country and your own people first. It's not radical to want to have a strong border, a strong military, and to unleash the might of your own economy, not economies around the world.
Isn't it remarkable how articulate she is? Karoline speaks with such clarity and conviction that it's honestly mind-boggling the hosts of The View opted to ridicule her instead of standing in solidarity with a fellow woman. Their reaction says more than words ever could. It exposes the deeper, often unspoken agenda that guides so many of their interactions. Now let's see where this goes. Something tells me Karoline is just getting started, and she's about to unleash even more inconvenient truths that will be impossible for them to sweep under the rug.
You know, we have seen cultural Marxism trickling its way through every institution in this country. The public school system, the higher education university system, Hollywood, big tech, the corrupt mainstream media that I fought against in President Trump's White House are indoctrinating my generation of Americans into hating our country, hating one another based on race and gender and all of this other BS, quite.
The very woman who had built an entire television career on overpowering conversations, silencing conservative viewpoints, and steamrolling over any topic that made her uncomfortable, suddenly found herself on the defensive. Whoopi shifted uneasily. In her seat, the trademark smirk had vanished, replaced by a tense expression and restless hands searching for something to cling to. She was used to guests stumbling over their words, struggling to keep pace with her sharp-tongued comebacks. But this time, the dynamic had flipped completely. No matter how badly she wanted to jump in, regain control, and steer the conversation back in her favor, she simply couldn't. Karoline wasn't leaving her the space or the opportunity to interject. And in that very moment, for the first time in what felt like forever, it became glaringly obvious to everyone watching. Whoopi Goldberg had talked herself into a corner, and there was no graceful exit. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then stopped. Tried again, still nothing. The words simply refused to come. The studio audience, usually quick to rally behind her with applause or supportive laughter, remained frozen in awkward silence. Even The View's most devoted fans didn't know how to react. The energy in the room had completely shifted, and now no one seemed sure whether to clap, chuckle nervously, or wait in uneasy anticipation for Whoopi to say something, anything, that might help her reclaim her footing. Even the production crew seemed caught off guard. Should they zoom in on Whoopi's stunned expression, capturing the moment of vulnerability that no one ever expected? Or would it be wiser to cut to commercial and hope viewers at home wouldn't fully grasp what just happened? Meanwhile, Whoopi, usually lightning fast with sarcasm or a dismissive eye roll, sat frozen in place. Her body language screamed discomfort. If she could have melted into the fabric of her chair, she probably would have. She had walked straight into a rhetorical trap. trap, and this time there was no snappy quip to dig her out. And then came the question Karoline had so brilliantly laid bare, the one that echoed through the studio like a bombshell. If wokeness is truly built on the ideals of diversity and inclusion, then why are conservative women so frequently the ones being ridiculed, excluded, and attacked? Why is it that those who constantly preach tolerance and acceptance become openly hostile the moment someone challenges their ideological narrative? In that moment, Whoopi Goldberg knew she had nothing. No cutting remark, no sarcastic jab, no trademark eye roll to spin the conversation in her favor. Just silence. Uncomfortable, lingering silence. Everyone in the room felt the weight of it. Trying to salvage what little control remained, Joy Behar jumped in, her voice cracking slightly as she delivered a weak, nervous joke. Anything to relieve the unbearable, tension hanging in the air, but it was far too late. The moment had already slipped through their fingers. The damage was irreversible, and Whoopi Goldberg had done what even her fiercest critics thought impossible. She had completely unraveled. Live on national television.
You know, listen, if you don't have anything to say, you blab. You just go on and 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 on.
Right.
That's what you hear.
Yeah.
When they don't have anything to hold you with, nothing to make you think about what they have to say.
It's honestly tough to sit through, isn't it? The way her responses come off, immature, dismissive, almost flippant, especially when she's confronted with facts that she simply can't counter with any meaningful rebuttal. It really makes you question how someone like her continues to maintain such a dominant voice and loyal following in the public sphere. It's genuinely frustrating to watch a person who so clearly lacks depth or intellectual substance still cling to a platform that once meant something. Maybe it's the result of her being so deeply embedded in the fabric of daytime television for decades, so familiar to audiences that her presence feels automatic, even if her commentary has lost its edge. But honestly, by now, you'd expect the network to have moved on, to have introduced someone capable of bringing deeper insight, actual balance, and more thoughtful dialogue to the table. Instead, here we are, and it's nothing short of baffling.
Talk at you, not to you, and that's what she was doing, and she was doing it, and it's not new.
No.
But everybody's hip to you all now.
Yeah.
And we are anticipating that you are not prepared. Because you keep saying you going and you preparing when you're on the trail.
And the internet, oh man, the internet completely exploded. Within minutes, memes were flooding timelines, reaction videos were everywhere, and Whoopi's stunned expression was plastered across every corner of social media, playing on an endless loop. But here's where things get even more outrageous. This wasn't Whoopi Goldberg's first time igniting a firestorm with her off-the-cuff remarks. In fact, over the years, she's managed to turn The View into what can only be described as a legal liability nightmare for ABC, dragging the network from one public scandal to the next. From shockingly tone-deaf comments about the Holocaust to her baffling defenses of individuals with deeply questionable records, Whoopi has consistently found herself at the center of the show's most jaw-dropping controversies. But nothing, and I mean nothing, hit ABC harder than the avalanche of defamation lawsuits that have piled up recently. First came Carrie Underwood, then Elon Musk, and now Karoline Leavitt. One legal battle after another, stacking up like dominoes, each one making it increasingly difficult for ABC executives to ignore the damage being done by Whoopi's unchecked rhetoric. And what's perhaps most damning of all? This time, Whoopi had no scapegoat, no fall guy, no junior staffer to deflect blame onto. She was entirely on her own, and she knew it. Now let's rewind for a second and talk about the Carrie Underwood situation. When Carrie performed at President Trump's second swearing-in ceremony, Whoopi and her fellow co-hosts didn't just express disapproval, they launched an all-out personal attack. They ridiculed her performance, dismissed her talent, and implied she had destroyed her entire career by appearing at the event. Some even went so far as to claim she had aligned herself with hate and extremism. It wasn't just criticism, it was a character assassination, broadcast in front of millions. And they assumed Carrie would just quietly take the hit and move on, but Carrie didn't play along. Instead of releasing a vague statement or hiding behind cryptic social media posts, she took a bold and unprecedented step. She filed a $1 billion defamation lawsuit against The View. And when that case finally made its way into the courtroom, something explosive came to light, something that caught everyone off guard, including Whoopi herself.
That you saw live on this program yesterday. Joy Behar stirring the pot of controversy after saying this about Karoline.
She's probably been putting there because according to Donald Trump, she's a 10. You know that's what it is.
Do you want to take this?
No, you cannot be attractive and smart. I will try to give Joy the benefit, and oh, thank you. I try to give Joy the benefit of the doubt that she didn't see that briefing. Because if you saw that yesterday on numerous topics, no big binder, I think she might have had a different impression of this young woman who held her up.
It's genuinely refreshing to witness someone finally break through the heavily scripted bias that The View has become known for. Seeing a guest stand their ground with such confidence, armed not with empty talking points, but with actual facts, is a rare and satisfying moment, especially when the usual voices, so used to dominating the conversation, start to falter and unravel. Moments like this feel like a win for anyone who's been craving a more honest, unfiltered dialogue. It's incredibly satisfying to hear a perspective that doesn't echo the same old narrative, a viewpoint that cuts through the noise and challenges the status quo without apology or fear.
You would have to give her the benefit of the doubt that she did absolutely no research or reading about anything dealing with Karoline Leavitt before she made that remark. Because Karoline Leavitt she went to St. Anselm College, she worked for WMUR
Ran
TV.
for Congress?
In New Hampshire, she ran for Congress at the age of 25, put out a very good campaign.
Honestly, you almost have to assume that Whoopi hadn't done a shred of research or even glanced at Karoline Leavitt's background before making that dismissive remark, because if she had, she would have known that Karoline isn't just some lightweight in the political world. She's accomplished far more than most people her age. Karoline graduated from St. Anselm College, worked for a sitting member of Congress from New Hampshire, and boldly ran for Congress herself at just 25 years old, executing a campaign that earned real respect and national attention. Karoline's track record speaks for itself. It's genuinely impressive, and it's encouraging to see her finally getting the recognition she deserves. Now, contrast that with Whoopi Goldberg. While she undeniably started her career strong, earning critical acclaim in acting and comedy, her recent public contributions are much harder to pin down. These days, it seems her role on The View revolves more around provoking outrage and stirring the pot than delivering anything of real substance or thoughtful analysis. At this point, her place on the show feels more like a result of seniority than relevance. It's difficult to identify anything of true impact she's offered in recent years, and that's a problem.
She lost by 8 or 9 points, but she still put on a good campaign. Then she was the press secretary for the Trump campaign, going on TV literally every day.
Well, heavily pregnant and a new mom.
Pregnant. Yeah, she's a new mother. And then she goes out yesterday and gives and this, again, this is speaking very objectively, because I've watched every press secretary since going back to Marlon Fitzwater. Yeah, I'm that old. And she went out there for her very first briefing at the age of 27 years old, the youngest press secretary ever, and did a terrific job.
Leaked internal emails would later expose something far more disturbing. The smear campaign against Carrie Underwood wasn't some offhand mistake or spur-of-the-moment commentary. It was premeditated. According to those emails, ABC executives had deliberately orchestrated the attack in a calculated effort to boost the show's ratings. This wasn't accidental. It was a manufactured controversy designed to generate outrage, dominate headlines, and keep The View in the spotlight. When the truth came to light, it sent shockwaves through the industry. ABC's top brass scrambled to contain the fallout, ultimately forced into a massive settlement for an undisclosed sum. Behind closed doors, murmurs started swirling. Was The View becoming more trouble than it was worth? Just as the dust was starting to settle, enter Elon Musk. For months, Whoopi and the co-hosts had relentlessly painted Musk as a reckless and dangerous figure, lobbing one false accusation after another about Twitter's policies under his leadership. But Musk wasn't about to let the slander slide. He responded decisively by filing a defamation lawsuit that sent The View spiraling back into another high-stakes crisis. This time, the consequences were even more severe. Longtime advertisers began quietly pulling their campaigns, unwilling to associate their brands with an increasingly toxic environment. The once reliable ratings machine that The View had become was beginning to rust under the weight of scandal after scandal. Major sponsors began to question whether the show's visibility was still worth the risk. With lawsuits stacking up and ad revenue slipping away, the show's once solid foundation began to crack. The empire that Whoopi Goldberg had long presided over was now visibly collapsing under the pressure. And with 3 major lawsuits on the books and sponsors running for the exits, ABC went into full-blown panic mode. The View was no longer the untouchable asset it had once been, and the network was powerless to stop the unraveling.
I would like to young lady this is her first job, I would like her to do a little homework. Because she said something yesterday that really pissed me off. And that was, she said, there will be no wokeness here.
Oh, yeah.
Let me explain something to you. Because without that wokeness, you might not have that job.
Yeah.
Because women were not invited to that table. Women were not invited to many tables in this nation.
While Whoopi continues to spin herself in rhetorical circles, offering the same tired arguments over and over again, it's Karoline who's truly standing tall. She's not just holding her ground, she's pushing back with clarity, confidence, and conviction. In this entire situation, Karoline emerges as the real hero. She's the one cutting through the noise, refusing to be intimidated, and standing firm in the face of orchestrated hostility. Her calm, fact-based approach is a breath of fresh air in a space too often dominated by emotional theatrics and scripted talking points. She's not just participating in the conversation, she's redefining it.
The reason we fought and busted our behinds to make sure that you didn't have to worry about this. And now to hear you talk about it and to hear anybody talk about the wokeness was put in place for a reason. Because black people couldn't get into colleges. Because women could not get into the colleges they wanted to go to. This is all women. Yeah. See, this is not black, Asian women. This is all women. Women were not invited to this party. It was a man's world, and we busted our...
The reason we fought so hard and worked ourselves to the bone was so you wouldn't have to carry this burden. And now, to hear you reduce it, to hear anyone diminish the concept of wokeness like it's some kind of joke. It was created for a reason, Whoopi Goldberg said, her voice rising with passion. Because black Americans were denied access to higher education, because women, regardless of race, were systematically excluded from the schools they dreamed of attending. This isn't just about black or Asian communities. This is about all women. Women were never invited to this party. It was a man's world, and we had to fight like hell to earn our place in it. But that fiery monologue would be her last. Whoopi Goldberg's long-standing reign at The View came to an abrupt and stunning end. After years of steering the narrative, dominating conversations, and brushing aside voices that dared to disagree, the showdown with Karoline Leavitt marked a turning point, an unraveling that played out live for all to see. It was the moment the illusion of control shattered. ABC initially tried to soften the blow, calling it a temporary hiatus for Whoopi, but the public wasn't buying it. Behind the scenes, the truth was far more damning. She had been let go. The network was scrambling, desperate to recover as key advertisers began backing out, and even longtime fans started expressing doubt about the show's direction. With Whoopi gone, The View finds itself at a critical crossroads. Will the producers double down and find another voice just like hers to maintain the ideological stronghold? Or will they finally take a bold step in a new direction, one that encourages open, balanced dialogue instead of echo chamber theatrics? One thing is certain, the departure of Whoopi Goldberg marks a seismic shift in daytime television. Is this the beginning of the end for The View? We'd love to hear what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below.